And so, as I promised, the Shuriman expansion arrived for Legends of Runeterra, which means that we are going to dive into all the new lore it brings in. Now, normally with these new expansions, I would cover the new region first. However, this time around, the new additions to the other regions are so interesting we have to cover them first. Which means that today, we are going to cover all the cards connected to Kindred. First of all, I need to point out that just like Nocturne, Kindred were put onto the Shadow Isles not because that's where they would mainly hang out, but it's more because of gameplay. Kindred representing death and having mechanics that slay weaker enemies really does fit in with the Shadow Isles deck. The other thing I quickly wanted to mention is that I will cover these Kindred cards differently. Normally I explain each card as we look at them, but this time the connections between the cards are so interesting that we will go through the descriptions of the cards and then we will go through all the theories that tie them together. So without further ado, let's start with the descriptions of Kindred. Once there was a lonely man who split himself in twain. From one came two, born anew, never alone again. Of course, this is the original legend of Kindred. It is referring to their origins, which by the way is a story that was canonically confirmed in the Spirit Blossom event. Those of you who have played through the entire Spirit Blossom story may know that there the lamb lost her memory and the wolf revealed to her how they came to be. And of course, this is canon because Spirit Blossom Kindred are just the Ionian version of Kindred. That's how they picture them there. Anyway, in that story, it was revealed that once upon a time there was the Pale Man. The Pale Man was shunned by everyone, because his job was to take people away. Which means that obviously no one liked him, even though he always wanted to have a friend. This loneliness slowly consumed him, and every night he went to sleep, he wished he wouldn't wake up. Eventually the Pale Man had enough, and he simply split himself in two. And that's how the wolf and the lamb came to be. The original death sacrificed itself so that there could always be two, so that they would always have a friend. Now, in the original Kindred teaser, it was said that the Pale Man split himself with an axe. But in the Spirit Blossom story, the cutting tool was a knife. So really, we don't know how the Pale Man did it, but we know that he split himself in two. This poem then continues in the leveled up version of Kindred. Death took the form of hunters. None escape such as they. One conjoles with arrow and bow, one chases down its prey. One interesting thing to point out with this art is that I believe this is showing us that we are in the spirit realm. Not only would this make sense because Kindred are hunting down souls, but also if you have a look at the background, you can see these skulls and bones morphed into the environment. And if you zoom in on the skulls, you can actually see eyes within it. I believe that those are the leftovers of the souls attached to those bones. Alternatively, this could be in the far north of the Freljord, and this could be some kind of effigy built by the Ursine, but there is no snow or blood sacrifices, so I do believe that this is still on the Shadow Isles. And then, also tied to Kindred, there is the Spirit Journey, which simply says this is only an interlude. Referring to the fact that not only are Kindred often portrayed in plays, such as in the Traveling Theater in Demacia, but also, once you die, the journey through the spirit realm is an adventure in its own right. And I believe the flower we can see here doesn't have any significant lore meaning. It's simply a flower that's bright on one side and dark on the other, to represent the wolf and the lamb. But notice the little spirit butterflies around it, those will come in play later. And then we have our first minion, the Fading Icon. Who could forget their own god of death, other than those cursed with immortality? And what greater fear can a god of death have, other than being forgotten? Many believe that this description means that this person is immortal, and that in fact, this person may be another incarnation of Kindred. It certainly would suggest that this is a god of death, but as you'll see later, I don't believe that's the case. There is something even cooler behind this. Then there is Prey, which is another spirit animal, where the description says, they flicker through the dark forest, dotting the tree line like stars in the night sky, unaware of their pursuers. This basically confirms that Kindred are hunting down these spirits. And once again, we will get to the reason why later. Then there is Lamb's Respite, shine once more before the end. There's really nothing to point out here, it's kinda an abstract art. But then there is the Mask Mother. They say the Mask Mother created Kindred, just as she created all the incarnations of death. But from whom did she receive her mask, if she didn't craft it herself? Now this is another minion which a lot of people believed was a god of death. People believe that this is yet another incarnation of Kindred. And I absolutely understand why there would be that connection. First of all, the way this art is composed is a direct reference to the original art of Kindred. They are looming over a body lit by bright light, and they are taking away its soul. But here, the Mask Mother is taking away the souls with the masks. And it seems like depending on which mask she uses, the soul will have different shape. If you look at her back, you can see that there is a goat, a hippo, a monkey, a boar, some random ones, and what seems to be maybe a cat. Also, at the very back, you can see an ox. Also, in this art, I should also point out that the Mask Mother is taking care of one of the explorers. You can see that this is one of the people found on the Shadow Isles because they have the same runestones on their belt. But yet again, if you ask me, I don't think this is a god of death. There may be something even cooler happening with these. Then there is the Sea Scarab. Alright you lot, hold them traps up. And remember, if you see one of them Sea Scarabs, cut the rope and move on. I ain't risking the kill of whatever they've half-eaten, you hear? Now of course, what we can see here in the background are the Bilgewaterian tombs. You see, when someone dies in Bilgewater, they tie their bodies to something that either floats or sinks down. They essentially use the sea as a massive graveyard. But here, because the captain mentioned that these are traps, it seems like some pirates are so disrespectful they use these quote-unquote tombs as a bait for the sea monsters. And the captain points out that should they find a sea scarab, they should just quickly abandon it. First of all, this creature looks monstrous on its own, but I quickly want to point out that it does have human arms. So technically, this is actually a Vastaya. Then there is the Song of the Isles. Nothing really important here. It just has a quote of the Rekindler, which is a card found on the Shadow Isles. But then we have one of the Mask Mother's masks. It has a simple quote from the Mask Mother. "Come child, no need to be afraid." And you can see that she's offering someone the Mask of the Pig. Once again, we will get to this in a second. Then there is the Soul Spinner. And this is where things start to get really interesting. But first, let's have a look at the description. Once there was a heapless young man who thought to court a spider, never once suspecting he would end up in her web. Of course, we know the heapless aristocrat, who was following Elise, but it didn't end up too well for him. So there is the chance that this is how the fellow ended up. You can even see one of Elise's spiders at the back. Then there is the Spirit Leech, which is really just a monster created by the Harrowing, nothing special to mention here. And finally, there is the Aether Fiend. There is a couple of interesting things to point out here. First of all, in the front we can see the fading icon, who is obviously trying to hide from the Aether Fiend. But if you have a look at the connected card to it, called the Second Death, you can see that the Aether Fiend found him. But here's the interesting thing. The description is a quote of a totally different card. As my time on this place comes to a close, I find myself pondering not my first death, but the second. Who will be the last soul to remember my name? And when they too fall to this earth, what will become of me? The quote of Eminent Benefactor. The Benefactor is actually a card from Piltover. It's one of the people who was done with taking advantage of the weak. Now that he was old and he was in a wheelchair, he decided to use his inventions for good. But this card suggests that he's so close to death that he's wondering about what will happen after he dies. Of course, the second death is being forgotten by everyone. So this man is simply wondering how long will he be remembered for. Now the reason why his quote would be found on the Aether Fiend card could be because although he has nothing to do with this place, it's almost an artistic take on a quote that could be applied globally. It's like in a movie when there is one character who has a clever quote, but then the scene cuts to something totally different somewhere else. The same thing is happening here. His quote can't simply be applied to this card as well, because it seems like on this card we are near death. If you have a look at the background, you can see that there are a lot of physical trees, but among them there are the two spirit trees. I believe that this is a gateway to the spirit realm. That's where the fading icon is trying to get. Of course, he doesn't get there, he gets interrupted by the Aether Fiend, which by the way may mean that the Aether Fiend is some kind of a gatekeeper on the Shadow Isles. But regardless, applying the quote to this situation, the first death would be getting hit by the Harrowing, and the second death would be getting eaten by the Aether Fiend. But even when I say it like this, things might sound a bit confusing. So let's now dive into my theory as to what is actually happening here. You see, I don't believe that any of these new creatures are incarnations of Kindred. I believe that these beings are death-worshipping Vastaya living on the Shadow Isles. And here are my proofs. When you have a look at the Mask Mother, you can see that she approached someone who was already dead on the Shadow Isles. But that person was not turned into one of the undead spirits just yet. So before that happened, before the Black Mist would claim them, the Mask Mother walked in and she quote-unquote saved the soul of the dead person by sapping their soul using the mask. Depending on what kind of mask she uses, the soul will be sapped in a different shape. So for example here, once she placed the pig mask on the dead body, their soul was sapped in the form of a pig. Now the reason why I believe that this is some kind of a Vastaya is because the overall design of this creature translates to the other ones as well. If you have a look at her arms, not only may you notice trinkets and bracelets, which will appear on the other ones as well, but also the tattoos. If we then go to the fading icon, you can see very similar tattoos on him as well. And because they have these froggy legs, that's why I believe that this is some kind of a death-worshipping tribe of Vastaya. But even though these also wear the same masks which the Mask Mother puts on the dead, it seems like these Vastaya are unaffected by the masks. Because first of all, the Mask Mother is wearing it and she is alive, but this person is also wearing a similar mask, but still their soul is not being sapped. In the front you can see a totally different soul being sapped in the form of a mouse. And around him you can see 3 souls flying in the form of birds. If we then go back to the Aether Fiend, you can see that this Vastaya is actually herding these souls into the spirit realm in the background. I believe that this person did not want to get there himself, he was just trying to help the souls survive. But that seems to be only one way to deal with these souls, because if we then go back to the Soul Spinner, this one looks very similar to the Mask Mother. It's also a being wearing a similar mask while not being dead. And it is holding the same soul in the shape of a mouse which we have seen before. But here's the cool thing. While some may believe that the Soul Spinner is sapping the soul of the person below him in the shape of a mouse, I really don't think that's the case. I think it's the other way around. The Soul Spinner is using the soul they found, and they are shaping it into webs to catch their prey. You may also notice that this is the same kind of Vastaya as the other ones, because they also have the same bracelets, and they also have the same tattoos. But now before we go further, let me put everything into context. On the Shadow Isles there is this tribe of Vastaya who worship death. You have the Mask Mother looking around, finding the dead, and sapping their souls inside animal forms. But once these souls are trapped in these forms, they can then be used for different purposes. Which means that this Vastayan tribe kinda behaves like brokers with souls. They likely trade them and use them for different purposes. For example, the fading icon is probably empathetic towards the souls, and so he wants to escort them to safety. That's what the quote is actually referring to. Those cursed with immortality are actually the souls trapped on the Shadow Isles. But since this magic frees the souls from the curse of the Shadow Isles, they can be freed. That's why the fading icon tried to get these souls into the spirit realm. And you can see that right now he was herding 3 birds and a mouse. The 3 birds almost made it through, but since the mouse is not in the final art, that means that in the process it was lost. And it was lost because it was captured by the Soul Spinner. And here's the amazing thing. The reason why this Vastaya has 8 arms and not 2 like the others is because this one is in service to Vilemaw. You need to remember that Spider God is still nestled on the Shadow Isles. And so just like Elise, who can transform into a spider, and who in general has many limbs by default, just like her, this Vastaya was also granted the blessing of Vilemaw. And you can see that using a captured soul, it is spinning a web on a sacrificial altar which will summon Vilemaw. You can see that the altar links to the other cards we can find in the game. So this really shows us that yes, some of these Vastaya may try to save the souls, but some of them are not that kind-hearted, and they are using the souls for doubtful purposes. Remember that we have met this kind of magic before. Look no further than to Mordekaiser, who is currently forging an entire fortress using the souls of the dead. The last thing I want to mention here is, what is even the Aether Fiend then? Well, in my opinion, the Aether Fiend is the only being that can be another incarnation of Kindred. You see, we know that Kindred are trying to hunt down these souls. We learned that from the Prey card. And it makes sense. These souls were supposed to be dead, but now their lives were prolonged with these masks. So of course Kindred would try to remove them. And that's the same thing which the Aether Fiend is doing. It is hunting down these souls. Either it could be because it is another incarnation of Kindred, or it is just a creature that is feeding on the souls. Either of those would work. Finally, before people go mad in the comment section, let me quickly address the description of the Mask Mother. It says that the Mask Mother created Kindred just as she created all incarnations of death. However, the description has "they say" at the very beginning, which means that this is just a legend, a theory of those who have seen her. Which would absolutely make sense. If you are a random wanderer who walks onto the Shadow Isles, you see someone die, and then you see this creature walk up to it and sap their soul in an animal form, you sure as heck would think that this is death. And since they are using masks, it would absolutely line up with the legend of Kindred. However, since we know the grand context, we know that the Mask Mother did not create Kindred. Circling back to Spirit Blossom, unless this Mask Mother is somehow the Pale Man, who is supposed to be dead, I am pretty sure she did not make Kindred. Also, if she was this godly being, why would there be more of her kind on the Shadow Isles as well? But yeah, that's my full theory as to what's happening here. You need to remember, despite all of this fitting together really well, and I mean, I couldn't really find a flaw, it is technically still a theory. Nothing was confirmed, but if you sew it all together, it all gives you an amazing story. I know this was a long video, even though we only had a couple of cards to talk about, but I told you, this newest expansion is insane, and the lore it gives us is plentiful. You just wait till we get to Lysandra. But before that, we will likely talk about Shurima.